I have a problem. I'm getting married in literally 4 days, and that's not the problem. The problem is I need to make this ceremonial knife set out of this tiger wood. This is one of those moments where I'm an idiot. So many product failures and mistakes due to incompetence. I mean, this project was basically like an escape room out of my own idiocy. I didn't really Google enough things, and I kind of like doing that. I want to just fumble through it and learn the ways not to do as much as the ways to do, and that's what I'm going to show you today. So if you have a lathe, stick around. If you've got a shop, I got a couple tips in here for you that might apply even if you're not a turner. Spoiler alert, these came out pretty cool. Now I have a bone to pick, but also I love Rockler. So in good faith, I'm not sponsored by them, and I probably won't be after this video because I think the products that they're using are inferior. I love putting tape on these drill bits and watching it blow away the sawdust, by the way. But anyway, the sawdust is not the problem. The problem is the threaded inserts here. And you'll see why in a second, because I've put in a ton of these threaded inserts. I love putting in little blips of super glue and solidifying them in there. You can use epoxy too, obviously. But as I turn these down, it snapped in the hole of the only blank I have. I'm getting married in 4 days while I'm editing. So I have no time to go find these. I got these on vacation anyway, so I wouldn't be able to. So you see that crack? It's halfway in there. This just pisses me off so much that they use these super, super thin threaded inserts. So I absolutely crushed this thing trying to get it out, but it was embedded in the wood. This was kind of the start of the product failures for me. These threaded inserts are just bad. There's no way to say it. I've put in hundreds of these things, and this rarely ever happens. The ones I've ordered online are so much better, and I'll show you those in a second. But it was like a roller coaster. I was like, oh, God, this is terrible. And then, oh, wait, it's still going to kind of work. Oh, this is terrible again. I threaded this cake thing in, and it just completely twisted without any resistance whatsoever. And I think this is a product failure as well because the metal is super thin on this one, not the other handle, but this one is, you know, there's no reason for it to be thin there. It's just a product oversight. Maybe it's a cost-saving measure. I don't know what it is, but this is supposed to be an heirloom quality piece, and it's really disheartening when the products you buy are inferior, and they just are. And I'm sorry to say it, but I have to be honest here. Rockler needs to do better. So I threaded the other one on. I saw that it was going to work as long as I sanded this thing down. So what am I going to do now? Well, I have a whole nother one to make. So let's try again. And here's the threaded insert that comes with it. Look how thin it is on top. Big, wide teeth, I guess, if you will. This is the insert that I bought on Amazon. It's so much more robust, but unfortunately, this is not a 1/4-20, so I can't really use that. So I got to use this crappy one, and let's see. I widened the hole wider than it even says it should be, and let's see if it works this time. It broke again. I realize now I could have maybe screwed this in using a 1/4-20 bolt inside of that thing to strengthen it, but should I have to do that? Surprisingly, both of these still threaded on after the catastrophic break that I had, which this is such garbage. I guess was the silver lining. So that's the very upset with the quality of this though, because it's a very cheap part. You could do a lot better. Luckily, I got away with it this time, but I won't be using these in the future. See, that crack runs all the way down. So I basically made a Minecraft handle. I'm going to use this shoulder piece to thread it into that insert and then hold it on the lathe. And this is where I made about 100 mistakes in a row. So please bear with me while I learn on the fly. I've never done this before, so something really stupid happened, and you'll see me come to that realization at some point. I promise you it gets better than this. But I like showing my mistakes because that's where we learn. And if you've never done this and you see me make this mistake, then you won't make the mistake when you go to do it. And that is the value I bring. I'm making mistakes for everybody out here.
I'm going to use this to grab it on the chuck this way and use my...
So I am talking to myself so I can remind myself when editing what the heck I was actually thinking. And when I listen back to this, it is very convoluted, but I persevered through my stupidity and spent a whole bunch of time that I didn't need to spend. And that's part of the value here. I'm going to show you the right way to do it, but if you happen to know, if you're a turner and you know what I'm doing wrong here, put it in the comments. Yeah, it's definitely painful to listen to this. It's not the way to do it. I can't emphasize that enough. I like going out and just doing something for the first time. It's like an escape room from my own stupidity. But I turned this thing down so that I could hold it in my actual chuck. And then I'm going to flip it around and use the live center inside of the threaded insert because it's a cone shape, so it'll kind of hold it right in the middle. That was my thinking at the time. Now, there's a huge flaw with this because the point of the shoulder being in there in the first place is so that I can match it up perfectly. Also, my tailstock kept backing out, which was infuriating. It hadn't really happened to me on other projects, but as soon as it backs up, you can tell because you get a ton of chatter while you're working. So there you go. The cone is in the threaded insert hole, and it actually seems to be working pretty well, which is part of the problem, because sometimes my stupid ideas work to a degree, even though there's a much better way. So without belaboring the point too much, I'll just show you, what I did. I essentially turned it round while chucked up in this convoluted way. I'm even thinking I can use my screw chuck at this point because it hasn't occurred to me what the actual solution is. It's very painful to watch yourself be an idiot. But here we are. I turned it round for the most part. And then I showed how different a spindle gouge is, and this is the right tool for the job. It might be a little large for this project, but I love this tool. Only on spindles, though. Don't use it on a bowl, or you will find out that bad things happen. Ask me how I know.
You can see the curls. It's generally a good sign.
I put my tool on top of the workpiece when it's rotating just to hear the chattering from the flat spots. And that's a good indication so you don't keep stopping the lathe and looking. In this case, I have wax all over it so you can easily see. But this is one of those moments where I'm an idiot. I have never used one of these before, and I've never turned a handle with a threaded insert in it, believe it or not. So it never occurred to me to use the drill chuck to grab this. I was using my regular chuck and it was slipping, so I kept flipping it around. I've made very little progress so far, but now that I know I can use my drill chuck on the drive side of the lathe, this is gonna go a lot faster. And it actually gives me ideas for a future video, but let's do this. So there it is. The drill chuck on the motor side of the lathe, or the powered side of the lathe. I don't know why it didn't occur to me. I knew there was a better way. It didn't occur to me. And that's why YouTube is awesome. Thanks to that mystery man, I am off to the races. So satisfying when you're on the bevel. And that little catch happened because I touched the tool unintentionally to the wood. I caught an edge, and that happens a lot when you're not paying attention, so obviously pay attention. At this point, I had no real plan. This is the first handle I'm doing, so I just kept grabbing it and seeing how it felt in my hand. I knew I wanted a place for my thumb to be up there at the top, so that's what that area near the collar is. And then the bottom, I wanted it to flare back out a little bit to give it a nice sort of pommel, I think they call it. But Other than that, I was just freestyling here, and I knew I was going to have to make a second one, so I'll show you my technique for that in a second. I often do these sweeping double curves in my bowls and things, and I find that it kind of adds a little bit of flair. It feels good. Now what I'm doing is I'm taking these carbide tools, which I used in my previous video. These are very bad quality tools, but I just wanted a slight mark for a little embellishment. My thinking was that my thumb is going to sit up here on the top, so I could do two things. I could add a little embellishment that would also serve some sort of function, which is like a grip, essentially. So giving these little extra line details, I just divided that upper space into 3, and I kind of eyeballed it, and then when I went back to measure the second time, it was exact, so that was cool. I don't know how that worked out, but I first eyeballed the middle one, and then I split the 2 other sections in half just to keep it simple. These types of details, no one's going to take a ruler to it, but you need to just eyeball it and make sure that it looks at least somewhat intentional. Then I sanded down because it lifted some of the edges, and now I'm using a technique that I've used before where I take a wire and it essentially burns in these marks. You can see the smoke coming off there, and it makes them darker. And that's just straight up a visual way to give you a little bit of contrast, especially on mallets and other things. This is a really good technique. Just any kind of wire with a little bit of friction on the wood will give you a friction burn there, and then you'll just clean it up with sandpaper, and when you put finish on, you'll have 2 different colors even with just one species of wood. In this case, I'm using zebra wood, so kind of already has baked in contrast there, but like I said, I wanted some functionality here. Now you can see what I mean by my thumb grip and the way that it fits in my hand. It felt really good. So the last thing to do was to part it off on the bottom. I wanted to wait till the very end to do this because as you can see, things start to wobble. This tailstock kept backing out of my piece, and I had to keep, sort of forcing it back in there. While the shoulder did hold it fairly well, you wouldn't want to turn this without tailstock support until the very end. So fit perfect. Thumb grooves actually do work, surprisingly.
I kind of like that it's like black.
I threaded the other handle on just to show her.
So we're doing chocolate and vanilla.
Yeah. It's pretty. I love it. Thank you, baby.
So here's how I fixed this nightmare. I just took it to the old belt sander, and I don't have my proper shop set up yet, but that's coming soon. I just belt sanded it down, and it's horribly ugly on that side, but you'll actually never see that, so I think it's okay. I chucked it back up using the drill press this time, thankfully. I've learned from my mistakes. Now I got to make 2 exactly the same, and I've shown you before how to use a templating jig, which you can see in the background. I have a full video on that if you want to make repeated exactly the same pieces. I basically came up with the way to do that, and what I have here is a hot tip. If you're a turner, you're most likely working on a giant piece of steel or cast iron, whatever it is. Stick a magnet on the back of those pencil sharpeners, because you use pencils all the time and you break tips all the time. I know you can use mechanical pencils, but these ones actually require some resiliency because you usually are turning them around on some pretty rough wood. So I don't like mechanical pencils for this application. Normally I do. So I'm marking my high points, and just doing that by holding up the piece and then spinning the lathe by hand to get a mark all the way around. And these are reference points so that I can match with calipers the exact size that I need. This is, again, the traditional way of doing it. You could have used my duplicating jig here, but I really didn't want to take the time to set it up. This was actually faster in the end, and I got, well, you'll see how good I did. So I take my calipers and I put with very little pressure on top of my parting tool, and I just part it down until the calipers slip over that. This is somewhat of an advanced technique, so if you don't feel comfortable, just cut a little bit, use your calipers. Cut a little bit, put the calipers back on until you're there. Boom. So we're there. Now I have a mark for that first thumb grip area. And obviously the end is marked by the shoulder. If I say shoulder one more time in this video, you're all going to leave. So I did the same thing. I tried to follow the same type of curve. I had to clear some waste out on the other side of that mark just so I could get in there with the tool without catching. Generally speaking, you don't want to cut with two parts of the tool at the same time. That's where you're going to definitely get a catch. Ask me how I know. So I actually measured. Luckily, when I turned this around, I turned it exactly the right size for the widest point. I got lucky. I could have screwed that up pretty badly. So I looked again, and I measured twice, cut once, right? My mark was actually 1/4 of an inch off once I cut that shoulder. So I fixed that, and I started hollowing out the handle area so that my hand can grab around it fairly easily. I know this is a big honkin' handle anyway, but I want it to be decorative. So I measured with the calipers again, and then it occurred to me I should just do the same technique to mark the middle with the parting tool. So I brought that down, same process as before, where I stuck the calipers in there. So I got it down there, perfect. I left it a tiny bit wide just so that I could have some sanding room and things like that. And then I just turned it down to that line from both sides and meeting in the middle. I got rid of most of the tool marks with the tools and then sanded the rest of the way. Then I measured with straight calipers the actual lines that I put in for my thumb grip, and I scratched with one tip instead of using my pencil or my other carbide tools first. I wanted to give myself a guide, so just a light scratch just so I can see it. And I was pretty amazed that my lines were perfect according to the calipers, and I eyeballed them, so that was cool. Put my lines in, took my detail tool. Again, probably should put this on a handle, but ain't nobody got time for that. I put some lines in there just so I could register the wire, and I'm doing the same process again if you haven't noticed, so sorry about my piss poor editing here, but I wanted to show you in painful detail how to get the exact same detail with something like this, because a lot of times you're making a set. This is a 2-knife set, as you know, and I wanted to challenge myself to see how good I could make it. And it turns out I could do a pretty good job just using the old school techniques, and I don't need a lathe duplicator for this type of work. So if you saw my last video and you said this can be done manually, you are right. It gets significantly harder when you're doing a pawn for a chess piece, for example, but there you go. I put some Yorkshire grit on this thing. I absolutely love that stuff, and I'm not sponsored in any way. But I put it on pretty heavy. I wait for a few minutes, and then I turn it off. And when I apply it, I have the lathe on the slowest speed. There it is. So let's compare.